For 10,000 years, the Xal'tari Dominion ruled with a grip of iron and flame across the stars. They spread like a creeping tide, consuming systems, stripping cultures, breaking resistance. Before it could rise, their war engines were vast beyond comprehension, their ships kilometers long, black as the void, silent as death. They did not come to negotiate, they came to dominate, to erase, to rewrite entire civilizations in their image. And when they arrived, the sky went dark, the stars blinked out, and a new banner was raised high above the ashes of defiance. They were not cruel, not in the way that implies emotion. They were efficient, detached, unbending. They believed in the order of power and the purity of conquest. They bred soldiers in vats grown with neural implants, forged in orbital crucibles, raised without names, only numbers, without love, only loyalty, without fear, only obedience. These were not people, they were weapons, and weapons obeyed without hesitation, without question, without failure. The Xal'tari did not simply fight wars, they ended them before they began. Intelligence networks spanned sectors, tracking whispers of rebellion, silencing them with precision orbital strikes and neuroviruses. Before the first protest was ever spoken, their record was perfect, their enemies forgotten, their control absolute. And in all their records of conquest, one fact remained unchanged: no species had ever turned them back, no world had ever survived their full attention. Once the eye of the Xal'tari turned toward you, your future became a shadow cast only in memories. When their explorers charted the old routes to the outer reaches, they found only dead systems, scorched rock, black suns, broken moons drifting in silence. But in one sector forgotten by time, and thought long collapsed, they found something strange, a faint signal, weak but consistent, encoded in archaic data formats, buried beneath layers of distortion and decay, a simple broadcast on repeat, pulsing across space from the Sol system. It was ignored at first, dismissed as cosmic background noise, until a junior analyst decrypted the core message, a warning left behind by a civilization thought extinct, a voice ancient and human, filled with static but unmistakable in its rage. The message was short but clear to all who heard it. We are not gone, we are not done. And if you come here, we will show you hell. The Xal'tari High Command laughed. Their victory was certain, their might unmatched. Humanity had died centuries ago during the Great Collapse, a footnote in the vast chronicles of the Dominion, a failed world that burned itself to dust. They saw no threat in bones and echoes, but the signal remained pulsing, growing stronger, as if it knew they were listening, and something about it made the room feel colder. They sent a scout fleet, not because they feared, but because they were thorough. They expected ruins, maybe an automated defense system, or a dead satellite clinging to orbit. They expected silence. They expected dust. They expected one more world to conquer. But what they found in the dark was not a grave, and what waited on the other side of that fading blue star was not the past. It was the end of their certainty and the beginning of humanity's return. The Xal'tari scout fleet emerged from slip space with cold precision, dropping into high orbit around the third planet of the Sol system. They came in standard formation: 3 trade ships, 6 destroyers, 2 signal interceptors, and a command vessel, their hulls bristling with sensors and weaponry that had silenced hundreds of civilizations. Before the fleet scanned the planet, expecting to find the broken relics of a lost species, perhaps some ruins or outdated orbital junk, a lifeless world caught in the slow decay of time. Instead, they found clouds thick and alive, storms writhing across continents, oceans full and surging, mountains carved by force and nature alike, and cities, yes, cities, massive continent-spanning cities, buried beneath atmospheric cloaking grids layered with stealth tech, more advanced than anything in the Xal'tari database. This was not a dead world, this was not forgotten, this was a trap. They launched probes within seconds, fast, sharp, intelligent machines bred for reconnaissance and survival. The probes descended toward the planet only to vanish one by one, swallowed by pinpoint railfire. From the surface, unseen platforms, invisible to every scan, calculated their trajectories before they even began. The sky answered with silence. Then came the voice, not from the planet, but from within their own systems, a voice that had no source and no signature, a voice that spoke in perfect Xal'tari dialect, and yet carried something unfamiliar, something ancient and terrible. It said only 2 words: "Welcome back." In that moment, every screen aboard every ship went black for exactly 6 seconds, and in that 6 seconds, every system was breached, mapped, mirrored, turned inside out, and handed back like a gift wrapped in threat. When the displays returned, the Vraxi command vessel's AI had been overwritten, the dreadships targeting arrays now looped phantom targets, and worst of all, every crew member felt something they had never felt before. Fear. It was not the fear of pain or death. It was the fear of something smarter watching them, waiting, measuring them like prey, the kind of fear predators feel when they realize they are not alone in the dark, and that something else has sharper teeth. Captain Ralak of the Vraxi command vessel gave the order to retreat, a signal burst of desperation unheard in Dominion history. But it was too late. The space around them shimmered like heat-off metal, and ships began to appear, dozens of them, Terran vessels of every shape and size, sleek, jagged, asymmetrical constructs of war that moved as if they were alive. No announcements, no demands, no hesitation. The first shot came from behind. A kinetic slug traveling at a fraction below light speed turned the lead destroyer into a storm of plasma and debris. Before its sensors registered impact, within seconds, a full third of the Vraxi fleet was gone, turned into metal vapor by orbital strikes coordinated by systems the Vraxi could not track, could not understand. Those who survived screamed for slip space evac, but the field had been locked. Nothing escaped, no one escaped. And as the Terran fleet closed in, broadcasting no message, only music, a slow, haunting melody woven with static and memory, the Vraxi learned the first lesson of war against Earth. Never assume silence means safety. Captain Ralak watched helplessly as the wreckage of his fleet drifted through the cold nothing of Sol, space pieces of blackened hull and frozen bodies turning slowly, caught in silent death spirals. Terran weapons had ripped through Vraxi armor like it was paper, and the most terrifying part was that the humans had not even deployed their full arsenal. Not yet. The first volley had come from platforms hidden in the asteroid belt, projectiles so dense and fast they tore through 3 ships with a single shot. The second wave came from the planet itself, orbital mass drivers buried beneath the crust launched payloads that arced like fire from hell, striking with pinpoint accuracy, without warning, without sound. Then came the ships. They moved unlike anything in the Dominion database, engines that bent gravity in ways that violated known physics, black mirrored hulls that flickered in and out of visible light, shapes that changed depending on where you looked, not smooth, not beautiful, just brutally effective and horribly efficient. They did not form battle lines. They did not follow formations. They hunted. They stalked the Vraxi ships like wolves in a burning forest. Ralak had faced rebellion, uprisings, and even full-scale war zones. He had crushed insurrections and ordered orbital purges of entire cities. He had never felt outmatched until now. Now he felt like a child playing with fire, standing at the edge of something too big, too old, and far too angry. As his remaining ships scrambled to recalibrate their systems, the humans struck again, this time with software attacks. Their viruses were not viruses in the conventional sense. They were evolving organisms, code that grew and changed mid-infiltration, learning, absorbing, adapting. Within seconds, Dominion targeting systems went blind, life support glitched, engines sputtered, and automated weaponry turned on its own crews. They had not even seen a human yet, not one, and they were already losing. One of the destroyers managed to land a glancing blow on a Terran ship, a lucky shot, a flash of hope. But the blast simply passed through it, as if the vessel was not entirely in the same dimension, and then it responded. It closed the distance in seconds, opened a forward bay, and released a storm of drones, too fast to see, too quiet to track. Shaped like blades and fire, they sliced through hulls with surgical precision, and retreated just as quickly, leaving the destroyer in 3 pieces, drifting apart in silence. This was not war, this was execution. On the command deck of the Vraxi flagship, Ralak gave a new order: prepare a full transmission to Central Command, warn them, tell them Earth is not what we thought it was. And then the human voice returned across every speaker, every frequency: calm, cold, final. There will be no transmission. The comms exploded in a burst of sound, not words, but a scream not of pain but fury, not from one voice, but from thousands overlaid, layered, recorded from ancient battles, and twisted into one long howl of vengeance and fire, and the sky behind them, filled with more Terran ships emerging like ghosts from the void. First contact had been made, and it was the last mistake the Vraxi would ever make. The sky over Sol was no longer a sky. It was a crucible, a forge of war and vengeance, where the children of Earth returned not as diplomats, not as refugees, not as survivors, but as executioners with memories carved in bone and steel. They did not send messages, they did not speak of treaties or peace, they came in silence, and struck with the fury of a species that had tasted extinction, and clawed its way back through darkness, through ruin, through centuries of self-inflicted fire and cold and blood. They had vanished from the galactic stage for so long that the stars had forgotten them, fought them extinct, irrelevant, a whisper lost in time. But humanity had not been idle. They had gone underground. They had left their broken Earth behind and spread like fire through asteroid fields, through forgotten moons, through the black, between stars, building in silence. Not rebuilding, no rebuilding was too small, too passive. They rearmed, they reforged, they became something more, something the Vraxi could never understand, because they had never known desperation like humans, had never known loss like humans, had never crawled through nuclear winters and bioplague summers, had never watched their skies burn with their own making. The Terrans had embraced war, not as a choice, but as a consequence of survival. They did not polish their weapons, they fed them. They did not mourn their dead, they learned from them. They did not fight fair, because fair was for those who had options, and Earth had run out of options long ago. Now they returned. From the moons of Saturn came carriers the size of mountains, shaped like daggers, and coated in nanofluid armor that adapted to every hit. From the dark side of Luna came rail platforms, chained to gravity wells launching singularity bombs that folded ships in half. From the belt came swarm pods full of machine minds, ancient intelligences that had slept for centuries and now woke hungry. The Vraxi fleet fought back with every protocol, every formation, every calculated angle of attack. They adapted, they analyzed, they evolved. But the problem was that humans evolved faster. They did not care about the rules. They rewrote them in real time, using chaos as strategy, fear as fuel, pain as guidance, and death as momentum. Human dropcraft pierced Vraxi hulls and deployed troops in full assault gear, bodies wrapped in exosuits powered by dark matter compression engines, fists that could crush bulkheads, helmets that translated thought into fire. Teams moved like phantoms, every Terran soldier a living weapon, enhanced, trained, broken, and reforged in 1,000 brutal ways. They used sound as a weapon, screams from lost colonies encoded in bursts that disrupted Vraxi neural links. They used light as a blade, flash patterns that blinded machines. They used gravity itself, folding space in microbursts that shattered shields and tore ships into jagged shrapnel. There was no front line because the Terrans were everywhere. The rage of old Earth was not loud, it was not chaotic, it was surgical, it was mathematical, it was exacting. It was the scream of a species that remembered every betrayal, every genocide, every child lost to the void, every city turned to ash by the arrogance of powers who thought humanity too weak, too savage, too late. But the truth was this: humanity was never too late. They were right on time. The Vraxi High Command could no longer deny the truth. The ancient empire that had never known defeat was dying, one system at a time, and not from rebellion, not from internal collapse, but from something far worse, something that should have stayed extinct, something that should have faded into the dark between stars, yet now burned brighter than any sun. Humanity had returned, and they brought with them not armies, not fleets, not diplomacy, but firepower from hell. Terran weapons did not follow the rules of war. They broke them, remade them, turned them inside out, and set them on fire, while the Vraxi watched, and blood and screamed. Kinetic slugs the size of buildings accelerated to near light speed, cracked dreadnought armor like eggs. Plasma fields wrapped in quantum entanglement tore apart shielding, as if it were air. Orbital strike lances deployed from black site satellites punched holes in Vraxi formations from halfway across the system, and none of it made sense, because none of it should have worked. But it did. And it worked because humanity did not care about cost, they did not care about symmetry or elegance, they only cared that the weapon fired, that the enemy burned, that the stars remembered their name. When the Vraxi tried to deploy a planet killer over one of their fringe colonies, the Terrans responded by hijacking the weapon mid-deployment, turning it back toward the Vraxi themselves, and laughing as the firestorm erased one of their own strongholds without mercy. When the Dominion sent stealth cruisers cloaked in phase distortion fields, the Terrans used gravity webs to rip them out of space and crush them like tin cans in the palm of an angry god. When the Vraxi unleashed their elite biomechanical shock troops, the Terrans answered with rageborn mechs, 12 meters tall, operated by single human pilots, fused into the machine mind, and roaring vengeance through metal and flame. This was not balance. This was not war. This was wrath. Terran scientists were not engineers, they were warpriests offering equations like blood sacrifices. At the altar of destruction, their machines ran on dark energy zero-point cores, antimatter implosion drives, and things not even named yet, things that bled reality at the edges and bent causality, just enough to break every known rule of engagement. The Vraxi could only react and die, react and die, react and die again and again as system after system fell into human hands. And those hands did not tremble. They unleashed nanophage storms that melted infrastructure down to its atomic roots. They deployed orbital glassing arrays that could erase a city in a blink and leave behind nothing but shadow. The Vraxi tried to bargain, but humanity did not forget. They tried to run, but humanity did not forgive. They tried to hide, but humanity had learned how to hunt in the dark. No warning, no hesitation, no mercy. The humans moved like myth and struck like truth, a truth the Vraxi refused to believe until their core worlds began to burn, and the stars themselves trembled at the weight of what had been awoken. This was not the rebirth of humanity. This was its reckoning. The throne world of the Xal'tari Dominion, once thought eternal, now hung in orbit like a dying star surrounded by debris, and silenced the stars that had once lit its empire flickered cold and distant, as if ashamed to watch what came next. The final Terran fleet emerged from the void without ceremony, without announcement, just a wall of black steel and fury, moving with purpose, with memory, with the precision of a species that had spent centuries preparing for this moment. Vraxi defense grids activated in desperation, billions of automated cannons firing blind into the darkness. But it was too late. The Terrans had already mapped every system, every pattern, every blind spot, and they moved through the storm like shadows, through smoke. No formation, no hesitation. They struck from impossible angles, weapons that warped space and tore open gravity wells, detonated above the palace towers. Kinetic lances turned shielded bunkers into molten blast drones small as insects, flooded control centers, and delivered viruses coded in pain. There were no negotiations, no demands, no ultimatum. The humans did not want surrender. They wanted memory. They wanted justice. They wanted every corner of the galaxy to see the fall of giants and know that fear had a name, and it was human. In the halls of the Imperial Core, the Vraxi High Emissary sent a final plea across the stars, a transmission meant for any species still listening. We surrender, we accept Terran sovereignty, we acknowledge the supremacy of Earth. But the humans never replied. They entered the Imperial Core with boots made of alloy and ash, soldiers who had seen worlds die and chosen to live anyway. They walked through corridors lined with gold and screams, tearing down flags and statues and monuments to Vraxi perfection, not because they hated symbols, but because they knew how much power they held. They did not kill the Vraxi leaders. They did something worse. They made them watch. Watch as Terran engineers dismantled their empire in real time. Watch as liberated species rose from the dust and tore down Vraxi strongholds with their own hands. Watch as the stories of Earth spread across systems, not as warnings but as promises. The promise that no empire lasts forever. The promise that silence is never the end. The promise that humanity remembers. And then the Terrans left, not because they were done, but because they knew the lesson had been taught. They left behind satellites broadcasting only one message in every language, on every frequency, across every system. We are not your masters. We are your mirror. Remember what you saw when you looked at us, and choose what you become. The Dominion fractured the core worlds, broken the outer systems, free rebellions. Once crushed now sparked like wildfire, and throughout the galaxy, the name of Earth became something else, not a world, not a threat, not a legend. A warning. Because the truth was never about firepower, never about weapons or fleets or strategy. The truth was about will and humanity, and the one thing the Vraxi had never faced before. The will to rise no matter how many times they fell. And in that truth, the stars would never again know certainty. Only the memory of Earth.